In a world flooded with information, learning should be easier than ever. But is it? For centuries, children learn the basics with a simple tool, one that is almost completely erased from history. What if we got it right back then, but then lost it? How we get information into our brains hasn't changed in 500 years. However, how we teach it has. And maybe that is the problem. Some people pick things up quickly, while others struggle a bit more. Now, wherever you fall onto that spectrum, one thing is certain: the stronger your foundation, the easier it is to build on that knowledge. Learning is like stacking blocks. If the bottom layers are weak, everything above them is shaky. That's why making sure that a child really gets their ABCs in early childhood is so critical. But I mean, if you look at the state of learning today, I'm talking test scores, attention spans, overall comprehension, it is clear that something isn't working. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. Schools are busy, distracting places. Technology plays a massive role in how kids learn, often in ways that might not actually help. If there is one thing that is crucial, no matter whether you are an adult or a child, is the ability to focus. And that's something that many learning environments today don't exactly encourage. So what does an ideal learning approach look like? Maybe we need to strip away the non-essentials and go back to basics. Now, for centuries, there was one object that helped generations of children learn the fundamentals of reading and writing. It was simple, effective, and widely used. And yet today, it's almost entirely vanished from history. Most people have never heard of it. That object is the Hornbook. This little device, a single paddle with the alphabet and key lessons printed on it, was a staple of education for centuries. It relied on rote learning, memorization, and repetition. And while those methods might seem outdated today, there is a strong argument that that's exactly what's missing from modern education. Okay, so today we're going to travel through history, starting from this basic literacy tool and journeying into the complexities of modern education. It's a story of simplicity and effectiveness versus technology and mass schooling. Let's see what we can learn by looking backwards. So, do you like to read? When you ask people that question, you mostly get mixed answers, mostly no's, maybe a few yeses, depending on who you're asking. And we tend to think of reading as this one thing. Do I want to watch Netflix tonight? Or maybe, read a novel? However, if you zoom out a bit and look at it from more of a historical perspective, it is so much bigger than that. It is a fascinating mix between the personal and the social. Like historically, literacy conferred status. Those who could read had access to knowledge, to scriptures, to philosophical writings, to business records. Being literate literally meant having power. And that's part of what makes the Hornbook so interesting. It is a small object, but it is packed with the potential to unlock society's doors. And of course, this all relates to education. Like, as the centuries roll by, important thinkers, Locke, Montaigne, Rousseau, shaped new ideals for education. However, when you apply these lofty ideals to entire populations, you can either succeed brilliantly or flop spectacularly. The question we'll keep returning to is, what is truly effective in teaching? If the Hornbook worked for centuries with its simplicity, have we in the digital age overcomplicated things? Or have we gained something that previous generations lacked?
Here is your student's customized lesson plan based on their skill level and interests.
Okay, so what exactly is a Hornbook? Picture the 16th century. Paper is scarce, printing is new, books cost a fortune, and reading is mostly a privilege of the elite. That's where the Hornbook shines. For over 300 years, this handheld tool was used to teach children across Europe and colonial America to read. No touchscreens, no algorithms, just letters protected by a layer of translucent animal horn. Although this one is covered with epoxy. Every Hornbook has at least 3 things: sturdy wood to survive grubby hands, a handle for portability, and this, the essentials, which can vary a bit. We have the alphabet, basic phonics, and a text to memorize. Most used was the Lord's Prayer, but we put the US Constitution preamble instead. And as the precursor to more advanced learning, it was used by children starting as young as 3 or 4 years old. And a single hornbook could pass between siblings in a family or different students in a school. And because of the way it is built, it is so sturdy, it could endure for several generations. Unlike if it was just a single sheet of paper. Now, students would carry these little wooden paddles around at home or in small local schools, reciting letters and practicing sounds. Then over time, with cheaper paper and more accessible books, the hornbook just gradually disappeared. But they served their purpose for hundreds of years, bridging the gap between orality and literacy. It is kind of astonishing to think that such a tiny object played a huge role in launching generations of children on their reading journeys. Yes, he teaches boys the hornbook. What is AB spelled backward with a horn on its head? Now, in the hornbook's heyday, formal schooling didn't look like it does today. Many children learned the basics at home, guided by a parent or an older sibling, and the hornbook's simplicity was also its strength. It focused solely on the fundamentals. We have letters, phonics, and rote repetition. There are no distractions, no frills. Mastery of these basics was the gateway to more advanced texts, if the family could afford them. Now you may be wondering, okay, who actually used one of these wooden paddles? Well, there is evidence to suggest that Shakespeare would have started his literary journey with something like this. And if you take the time period into account and the widespread use of this object, it is also very likely that people like John Milton, Isaac Newton, and Elizabeth I would have been educated using the hornbook, as well as many other people. The other thing that's kind of fascinating is how much did a hornbook cost? They were not cheap, typically costing a laborer's full day's wage. Actually, in 1635, Suffolk, England, a probate record valued a hornbook at 2 pence, which is about 0.5% of a laborer's annual wage. In colonial America, they were even rarer and pricier. A 1680s Boston inventory lists one at 1 shilling, or 12 pence. Now, for comparison, early printed books, like in the 1450s to 1550s, they were far more expensive. A prayer book cost 5 to 10 shillings, up to a month's wages. But by the 17th and 18th centuries, the New England Primer was priced similarly to a hornbook at 2 to 6 pence, while a full Bible still cost 5 to 10 shillings, or 1 to 2 weeks' wages. In the American colonies, books were even pricier due to import costs. But owning books wasn't just a matter of literacy, it was a matter of privilege. The hornbook bridged that gap, making basic education more accessible. Now, wealthier families might have had fancier versions, while poorer children used simpler ones. But no matter the design, they all served the same purpose, teaching literacy from the ground up. When you think about it, parents back then, just like parents today, recognized that reading was a pathway to broader opportunities. If you could read, then you could participate in local trade, in church, and perhaps even climb the social ladder. Now, despite the class differences, the hornbook was a shared stepping stone into the world of letters. If you were stepping into a 16th or 17th century classroom, you would not see rows and rows of identical desks or colorful alphabet chart on the wall, a lot of visual noise. You'd probably see a small group of children sitting around a single teacher, possibly each holding a hornbook. Memorization and oral repetition ruled the day. There was no distractions. There were no screens, no complex multi-subject curriculum for toddlers. Each lesson was deliberate, repeated until mastered, and, importantly, progressed at the child's pace. Okay, obviously I'm not saying that everything was great in the 16th and 17th century when it came to education. Obviously there were tons of issues back then. What I am saying, however, is that the methods used for teaching produced a different kind of mind. One where the knowledge became more foundational. Okay, now contrast that with modern early childhood classrooms, where I think lessons sometimes can feel hurried. Teachers, I mean, they juggle large groups, they incorporate a lot of technology, and they often have standardized benchmarks that they need to meet. So, we push young learners to master letters or phonics quickly. I mean, before their fleeting attention span moves on. Many educators feel like they only get snippets of focus from kids who've grown accustomed to constant stimuli. So, I mean, in many ways, it's our whole world that's at fault here, right? It has made us this way where we can't really focus on something. It's not just in the classrooms, it is everywhere. In the classrooms, it is especially difficult to deal with. Meanwhile, discipline and routine in the old sense has relaxed, I guess you could say. And some might say that that is good for creativity, while others argue that it leads to shallow learning. It is a striking difference, however, from the slow, methodical pace of the Hornbook era teaching. Now, before we dismiss rote memorization and repetition as outdated, let's remember that practice and repetition has been cornerstones of mastery for centuries. What the Romans called repetitio mater studiorum, repetition is the mother of learning. In the 16th or 17th century classroom, running through letters or words multiple times helped ingrain foundational skills in the child's memory. By solidifying the basics, students freed up mental bandwidth of higher level thinking, like comprehension, interpretation, and later on, creativity. One of my favorite examples of this is the old video, The Dot and the Line. Have you seen it? It's really good. So there is a line. He falls in love with the dot. However, the dot only wants the squiggly line because he's so fun and out of control. However, the line, he's a little depressed. He starts practicing on how to control his line and make interesting shapes. And eventually he is able to create these really intricate patterns and creations. And the dot, falls in love with him instead and realizes that the squiggly line is a hopeless mess. It's a great example of discipline versus spontaneity without any structure. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit, misattributed to Aristotle, popularized by Will Durant. Even classical thinkers recognize the power of consistent practice. When you say the same sounds or letters every day, you're essentially hardwiring them into your neural pathways. That kind of repetition can be a gift. It transforms a skill into second nature. Modern neuroscience backs this up too. Repeated exposure strengthens synaptic connections, making recall faster and more automatic. And far from stifling creativity, memorized fundamentals can enable it. If you don't have to strain to recall the alphabet or basic phonics, you can shift your focus to writing stories, interpreting texts, or even debating ideas. It's like a musician knowing their scales inside and out, and only then can they improvise freely. So while today's classrooms might pivot away from drill and repeat, the old Hornbook era shows that repetition wasn't about dull routine alone. It was an effective way to anchor knowledge, paving the way for real engagement and deeper understanding. Now let's say you want to pick up an old Hornbook. Well, good luck. Maybe you can find one of the few hundreds left in existence in a museum somewhere. Or you can make one yourself. First, I designed a main page, about 4 by 6 3/4 inches, and trimmed it to size. To attach it, we need wood. Beech or oak would have been traditional choices. This is oak. And here, just testing out some thin pieces of wood cut out for a border. And the borders to contain the epoxy we'll use a little later to protect the paper, since we don't have any horn on hand. To cut out the paddle, we used a laser engraver. Now, obviously, this would not have been used in the past, and it is not necessary. It does, however, provide a very clean and precise cut. But basically you just need a rectangle shape with some sort of handle. And as you can see, there's also a hole cut out inside the handle, so you can attach a piece of string or leather or something like that. To attach the paper, we sprayed on some adhesive and put it in the middle, then just glued on the wooden border. Now this is just one way to do this. The border will keep the epoxy in place. Obviously you don't want any gaps for that to work. It's important that the border properly dries on the paddle before pouring on epoxy. And the epoxy provides a translucent quality, almost like horn, I think, and you can control how thick you want it, so that is pretty neat. And then it adds a slight kind of yellowing tone almost. So I do think it is kind of a neat option. However, if you don't want to do epoxy, you could certainly just laminate the sheet of paper ahead of time and attach it to the wood, or cover it with a piece of plastic instead, or plexiglass. Lots of options there. We sanded the edges a bit and then finished the paddle with some wax polish. In terms of material, wood is obviously the classic choice. And I mean, oak does look beautiful. However, we first made one in plywood, which worked fine as well. You could also use a sturdy cardboard or something like that. Now for the design, I listed uppercase letters and lowercase letters side by side, then added blending sounds underneath. Instead of the Lord's Prayer, I included the preamble to the Constitution. Why the preamble? Because it is a culturally significant text that resonates with American history, and it feels like a nod to the Hornbook tradition of embedding moral and communal content. Using it is simple. You hold it up, run through the letters or words, and read aloud. The preamble is meant as a practice text to memorize, eventually working the child's ability to remember longer texts. The charm is the focus. It invites slow, deliberate learning. Making one really reminded me how tactile objects can connect you with history. It's been kind of neat having this object around. Okay, let's pick up our philosophical thread again. We've established some differences between classrooms in the past and classrooms today. And here is where the story gets really interesting. As society transformed, so did the theories about how best to educate children. We have thinkers like John Locke, who, in his Some Thoughts Concerning Education, outlined a vision of learning that was practical, gentle, and geared towards moral development. He famously wrote, "'Tis a great mistake to think that the mind grows cramped by being used too soon or employed in childish trifles." Locke believed that a child's mind was shaped by experience and gentle discipline, and that education should be tailored to a child's environment and interests. But remember, Locke's ideas largely emerged from tutoring elite children in one-on-one settings. So these revolutionary techniques, where he had all the time in the world to focus on a single pupil, I mean, they weren't necessarily scalable. Then, along came educational reformers like Horace Mann and John Dewey, who found inspiration in Locke's emphasis on a child-centered approach. In implementing these ideas from mass populations, something got lost. The intimacy and the adaptability of the one-on-one setting. One size fits all can definitely flatten individual needs. What worked fantastically for the aristocratic pupil of a philosopher might collapse when you have thousands of students from varied backgrounds. This mismatch led to friction in public education, as teachers try to replicate methods designed for a completely different environment. Okay, let's head to the 18th century. Reading has become more than just a basic skill. It was a social event. Historian Abigail Williams describes gatherings where reading aloud was a highlight, especially among the upper and middle classes. People hosted reading circles, public recitations, and literary salons. Being a skilled reader was downright fashionable. And a person's ability to read eloquently could boost their status and might even improve their marriage prospects. So being educated was carrying a completely different significance back then. Now, looking at today, I guess you can say that reading has definitely lost some of that social performance quality. But on the other hand, it has gained a new dimension with digital technology. We have endless ebooks, social media, replies, reviews, yet concerns about functional illiteracy are rising. This map here, based on information from the Natural Center for Education Statistics, shows scores calculated as averages that fall between a range of 0 to 500. In 2024, 21% of adults in the US were found to be illiterate, while 54% of adults had a literacy below a 6th grade level. So obviously things aren't great. In terms of the schools, more teachers rely on tech to capture attention, but does that inadvertently hamper the kind of focus that a Hornbook once demanded? When Locke's or Rousseau's ideas about gentle discipline and natural development were scaled up for entire populations, new problems arose. Horace Mann in the United States championed universal public schooling in the 19th century. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, Mann believed that education was the path towards a more moral and democratic society. But to educate everyone, he had to standardize. He had to create structured schedules and consistent curricula. So, Mann's vision, while noble, inevitably clashed with the personalized approach that Locke had advocated for. The nuance that Locke used for an individual child was diluted when you tried to handle hundreds or thousands of students. Now, Locke's concept of experience shaping the mind became an identical experience for all minds. It is the classic conundrum of mass education. To serve many, we must create a system, but systems aren't always flexible enough to meet each student's unique needs. Let's pause and examine a critical question. Where did we go wrong? If the Hornbook era gave us a concentrated method, one child at a time, methodical reading, why did that vanish? Well, partly because society grew. Populations boomed, and we needed an educational system that could handle scale. The industrial age introduced factory models of efficiency, and schools mirrored factories. Students sorted by age group, bells signaling transitions, standardized tests for measuring output. Horace Mann's contribution to education in America cannot be overstated. He wanted to offer free standardized schooling to every child. Now, this was a radical and democratizing idea, but the logistics required uniformity. Class times, seat arrangements, lesson progression. Everything followed a set pattern, not wholly unlike a factory line. Mann believed that by giving everyone the same lesson, you'd create an equal opportunity society. However, in practice, this one-size-fits-all approach can dampen individual creativity and hamper those who either surpass or lag behind the standard pace. The child-centered nuance of Locke streamlined into lesson plans for big groups. This tension is still with us. Universal access versus personalized depth. John Locke, tutoring a single aristocratic child, could adapt lessons on the fly. If the child had trouble with a particular concept, Locke could circle back until it clicked. Now, if the child displayed an aptitude for something else, Locke could follow that thread. Now, that's a luxury lost in big classrooms. There is a dividing line that develops after what we might call the ending of the Enlightenment period and the beginning of the social effects of the Industrial Revolution. We move from the individual to the group in our global move towards mass schooling. If Locke and Rousseau had the individual student in mind with their realizations, Horace Mann and later on John Dewey have their perspective shaped by lots of kids, bad behavior, and newly founded government authority. The Enlightenment laid the intellectual groundwork, but it was Mann and Dewey who harnessed state machinery to scale progressive ideals, turning classrooms into engines of social engineering. This duality, philosophical freedom versus institutional power, still defines debate over education today. When you look at the Hornbook today, it may look quaint, but it is actually like a powerful symbol of education before it got swept up into these large-scale theories and standardized curriculums. The Hornbook was individualized by default. You just have this one single page. And a child worked on that over and over again until they were ready for something more challenging. You have no complicated methodologies, no advanced psychological framework, just a direct link between a child's eyes, mouth, and mind. Now, if there is a lesson that we might take from the Hornbook's era, it's the idea of a calm learning approach, I think. Deliberate, focused, and unhurried. Kids learn their letters by holding up the same wooden paddle every day. I mean, just imagine that. And there is like a meditative quality in repetition and tactile engagement. If you wanted to teach a letter A, you tap it on the Hornbook, have them say it aloud, spell a word that begins with A, and repeat. No distractions, no scoreboards, no animated characters, no jumping around, just method and attention. Could we replicate that focus today with more modern tools? Maybe the challenge isn't about rejecting technology, but selectively using it. I mean, we can't ignore the influence of technology. Tablets and educational apps, I mean, they can do amazing things. Track progress, adapt levels, make learning fun. But they can also fragment attention. Where the Hornbook forced a child to focus on one single page, a tablet offers infinite possibilities. I mean, cartoons, notifications, games. So here we are back at this wooden paddle that once stood at the center of early literacy. It is a reminder that education began in humble, personal ways. Then along came giants of thoughts, Locke, Montaigne, Rousseau, and reformers like Horace Mann, brought in these ideas to serve the masses. But as we expanded and modernized, the personal core sometimes got lost. Now, the Hornbook and its era, I think it whispers a lesson, like slow down, strip away the excess, focus on the learner. If we apply great educational theories too broadly, I mean, we also risk diluting their power. And if we adopt technology too hastily, we risk losing calm, focused attention. Maybe, just maybe we can find a balance here. By remembering our roots and recalling a time when learning a letter of the alphabet was a proud, deliberate milestone. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past and present of literacy. I also want to say thanks to our patrons for supporting the channel. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a good one. Bye.